For years, Pernell Roberts was remembered as the principled actor who walked away from fame. But that story was only half true. In 2008, he recorded a series of private interviews so raw and unfiltered that he demanded they be destroyed, convinced the truth would shock too many people. Those tapes survived, and what they reveal isn't just disappointment or creative frustration, but a deep, personal resentment aimed at one specific person from Bonanza. And once you hear who it was and why, it's almost impossible not to gasp. In 2008, a little-known documentary filmmaker named Marcus Webb received a strange proposal. Pernell Roberts, the man who famously walked away from Bonanza at its peak, wanted to talk. 6 hours of unrestricted interviews, total honesty, no topics off limits. There was only one condition. Once Roberts had said everything he needed to say, the recordings had to be destroyed. Completely. No release during his lifetime. No release after his death. Gone forever. Webb agreed. He needed the money. Roberts paid $50,000, and over 2 weeks in his Malibu home, the interviews were recorded. Roberts was 80, dying of pancreatic cancer, fully aware he had months, not years. He spoke freely about Bonanza, Hollywood, and the people who, in his words, punished him for standing on principle. When it was over, Roberts watched as the files were deleted, the drives wiped clean. Satisfied, he thanked Webb and sent him on his way. But Webb didn't truly destroy them. As a documentarian, he couldn't bring himself to erase what he believed was history. He quietly recovered the files and kept them hidden for years, until Roberts had died, until the rest of the Bonanza cast was gone, until it was finally safe. In 2024, 14 years after Roberts' death, portions of those interviews surfaced. Not everything, only the parts about the people Roberts never forgave. What emerged was the confession Roberts tried to erase. The story of a man who walked away from television's second biggest show, chose principles over paychecks, and paid for it for the rest of his life. And on the tapes, his verdict never wavered. He didn't regret leaving. He said he'd do it again, because even when being right costs you everything, sometimes being right is all you have. On the tapes, Pernell Roberts spoke about Lorne Greene with a chill that cut through decades of public admiration. To America, Greene was the perfect father, wise, gentle, moral, the steady heart of Bonanza. Roberts didn't see a villain. He saw something worse, a comfortable man who never stood for anything. In his words, Greene's kindness masked a refusal to challenge racism, because challenging it meant risking popularity. The first break came in 1961, when Roberts objected to a script that portrayed a native tribe as mindless savages. He went to Greene, the show's star, believing his influence could stop it. Greene listened, sympathized, then declined to act. He didn't want to make waves. That moment, Roberts said, stripped away any illusion he had left. Greene chose peace over principle, and the pattern repeated for years. Each time Roberts protested racist stereotypes, each time he asked Greene to stand with him, the answer was the same. No trouble, no conflict, keep everyone comfortable. By 1964, Roberts tried one last time. The script had softened its tone, but still framed a native character as childlike and dependent. Greene refused again, this time openly, telling Roberts he wouldn't risk his career for someone else's crusade. That was the end. They remained polite, professional, distant, never friends. When Greene died in 1987, praised as television's greatest father, Roberts declined the funeral. On the tape, his judgment was final. Villains are honest about what they are. Enablers pretend to be good and are celebrated for doing nothing. On the tapes, Pernell Roberts reserved his sharpest anger for David Dortort, the creator of Bonanza. Roberts said Dortort sold him a vision of a Western that would confront racism, violence, and moral complexity. Something serious, something meaningful. That promise was the reason he accepted the role. But by the first season, he realized how quickly that vision collapsed once the network pushed back. Dortort argued briefly, then retreated, rewriting scripts to be safer, simpler, and more comfortable. Roberts confronted him early, still hoping Dortort would fight. He reminded him of what he'd promised. Dortort didn't deny it. He explained it away. The network controlled content. He had bills. He had a career. In his view, survival mattered more than integrity. Television, he said, wasn't about ideals. It was about money. Roberts saw it differently and told him so. Dortort called it realism. Roberts called it selling out. The breaking point came in 1963, when Roberts refused to film an episode that framed interracial love as tragic and doomed. He told Dortort he wouldn't participate in what he saw as racist propaganda disguised as progress. The argument exploded. Dortort accused Roberts of sabotaging the show. Roberts accused the show of harming real people, teaching millions of viewers that minorities were lesser, dangerous, or disposable. When Dortort finally asked if he was going to leave, Roberts answered yes. He would rather be right than rich. Roberts walked out and never had a meaningful conversation with Dortort again. Dortort stayed, produced Bonanza for years, made millions, and became a celebrated Hollywood figure. On the tape, Roberts acknowledged the outcome plainly. Selling out worked. Dortort was rewarded. He was punished. And yet, Roberts said, he still couldn't watch Bonanza without feeling sick, while Dortort, he'd heard, couldn't bring himself to watch the reruns either. To Roberts, that small detail said everything. On the tapes, Pernell Roberts described his battle with NBC with unfiltered fury. Bonanza wasn't just a show to the network, it was a massive asset. And when Roberts decided to walk away, NBC made it clear they would not forgive him. Executives summoned him to a closed-door meeting in 1965, not to negotiate creatively, but to deliver a warning. Leaving Bonanza, they said, set a dangerous precedent. If actors followed conscience instead of contracts, the system would collapse. Roberts told them he was leaving because the show promoted racism. The executives didn't argue morality, they argued profit. Bonanza made hundreds of millions. That was all that mattered. Then came the threat. Calm, precise, unmistakable. If he left, he would never work in television again. No roles, no guest spots, no commercials. When Roberts refused to back down, they followed through. For more than a decade, he was effectively erased. Casting doors closed before he could knock. Meetings vanished. Friends stopped calling. The message was simple. Hire Pernell Roberts and lose NBC. To survive, he retreated to theater and off-Broadway work, places the network couldn't control, scraping by while his television career withered. Some called it pride, others called it career suicide. Roberts called it the price of staying honest. The blacklist finally cracked in 1979 with Trapper John, M.D. By then, Roberts was 50, financially battered and professionally scarred. He didn't claim victory. On the tape, his conclusion was bleak. The machine always wins. You can be right. You can fight. But the system survives and moves on as if you never existed. NBC, Roberts said, was just a system. What hurt far more was the loss that came next, because this time it was personal. On the tapes, the longest and most painful section centers on Dan Blocker. The anger softens there and turns into grief. Blocker wasn't just a co-star. He was Pernell Roberts' closest friend, the one relationship in Hollywood he truly trusted, and the one that ended the moment Roberts walked away from Bonanza. From the beginning, the two men bonded. Both were Southerners, outsiders in Hollywood, and unusually candid. They ate lunch together almost every day, talked politics, civil rights, the war, and openly criticized the show's racist stereotypes. Blocker complained as loudly as Roberts did. He agreed the writing was wrong. Roberts believed that meant Blocker would eventually stand up. In hindsight, He realized something else was happening. Blocker was venting so he could stay comfortable. Everything collapsed in 1965 when Roberts told Blocker privately that he was leaving the show. Blocker was stunned and tried to stop him. He argued that leaving wouldn't change anything, that the show would go on without him, and that Roberts was destroying his own career for nothing. When Roberts insisted he could no longer participate, Blocker took it personally. What Roberts called principle, Blocker called abandonment. That lunch ended their friendship. They never reconciled. Roberts tried calling, writing letters, reaching out through friends. Blocker never responded. He stayed on Bonanza, became one of the most beloved figures on television, and never spoke to Roberts again. In 1972, Blocker died suddenly at 43. Roberts attended the funeral quietly, standing in the back, until Michael Landon told him he wasn't welcome. Roberts left, and later said it was the first time he'd cried in decades. On the tape, his voice breaks. Blocker, he said, was the one person he thought truly understood him. What hurt most wasn't that Blocker stayed. It was that he resented Roberts for leaving. One chose success. The other chose integrity. The show went on. The friendship didn't. And for Roberts, that loss, not the blacklist, not the money, was the true cost of standing on principle. On the tapes, Pernell Roberts spoke about Michael Landon with a mix of bitterness and reluctant respect. Landon, he said, was the one who truly understood Hollywood, not as an art form or a moral platform, but as a business where success mattered more than being right, and Landon mastered that reality early. The two men were never friends. Their relationship was polite, professional, and distant. Roberts saw Landon as relentlessly ambitious, focused not on meaning or message, but on momentum. While Roberts challenged scripts and argued with producers over racism and stereotypes, Landon was doing the opposite, building relationships, asking for more screen time, studying how the system worked. Where Roberts resisted, Landon adapted. Where Roberts fought, Landon planned. Shortly before Roberts left Bonanza in 1965, Landon came to his dressing room, the only time he ever did. Roberts explained his reasons for leaving, speaking about principles he couldn't abandon. Landon listened calmly, then offered advice that cut deep. Principles didn't matter in Hollywood, only outcomes. He told Roberts he planned to stay, learn everything about producing and control, and eventually build his own empire. Roberts accused him of compromising his beliefs. Landon replied simply that he didn't have any, and that was the difference between them. History proved Landon right, at least by Hollywood standards. He remained on Bonanza, rose to become its central star, then went on to create Little House on the Prairie, and later Highway to Heaven, both massive successes that made him wealthy, powerful, and beloved. When Landon died in 1991, he was remembered as a television icon. Roberts's final judgment on the tape was painful and honest. He didn't hate Landon because Landon was wrong, but because he was right. Landon played the game, won everything Roberts lost, and changed nothing along the way. Roberts still believed his principles were correct. He just wasn't sure anymore that they were wise. And with that realization, the anger shifted, away from Hollywood and toward the millions of viewers at home who never forgave him for walking away. This is where the interviews turn truly unsettling. On the tapes, Pernell Roberts' voice shifts from anger to something closer to fear. When asked who hurt him most, he doesn't name executives, producers, or co-stars. He names the fans, the people who watched Bonanza every week, the people who never forgave him for leaving. The backlash began the moment his departure became public. Roberts was flooded with letters, thousands of them, and almost none were supportive. Fans accused him of betrayal, not of a network or a show, but of fictional characters. Then the tone escalated. Death threats followed. Some wished cancer on him. Others said he deserved to be shot, as if he were still living inside the world of the Ponderosa. In public, strangers confronted him. Once, an elderly woman spit in his face at a restaurant and told him he had abandoned his family. When Roberts tried to explain his reasons, racism, conscience, principle, she dismissed them. All that mattered was that he had left. The hostility never faded. Years later, while struggling through theater work in the 1970s, a magazine interview reignited the outrage when Roberts said he didn't regret his decision. Hate mail poured in again, branding him arrogant and ungrateful. Eventually, he stopped doing interviews altogether. Even his later success couldn't rewrite the story. When Trapper John, M.D. became a hit in 1979, critics still framed it as redemption for his mistake, as if leaving Bonanza were a sin he needed to atone for, not a choice he stood by. On the tapes, Roberts draws a bleak conclusion. Fans, he says, don't want artists with principles. They want comfort, routine, and obedience. They don't want you to grow or change. They want you to stay exactly where they left you. His crime wasn't speaking out about racism. It was disrupting their sense of ownership. To them, Adam Cartwright didn't belong to him. He belonged to them. Roberts understood Hollywood eventually. It was a business. What haunted him was the audience. Studios moved on. Fans never did. For 40 years, strangers still approached him with the same question. Not gratitude, not understanding, just accusation. Why did you leave Bonanza? And that, he said, was the real punishment. Fame wasn't about being loved. It was about being owned, and the moment he took himself back, the fans never forgave him. The tapes end quietly. No more names, no more accusations, just Pernell Roberts, alone with his thoughts. Speaking to Marcus Webb, he answers the question he's been asked for decades. Did he regret leaving Bonanza? After 40 years of blackballing, financial strain, resentment, and isolation, his answer never changes. No, he would do it again. Not because it worked out, it didn't. His career never truly recovered. Trapper John M.D. gave him stability for a few years, but it could not erase the long stretch when Hollywood shut its doors. Not because he was happy, he wasn't. He admits he spent years angry, watching others succeed by compromising while he struggled. He would do it again for one reason only, because he believed he was right. On the tape, Roberts speaks plainly. Bonanza, he says, wasn't harmless nostalgia. It trafficked in stereotypes that taught millions of viewers to see Native Americans, Mexicans, Chinese, and black people as lesser. It was comfortable, popular, profitable, and wrong. He could not continue being part of it. Even if the cost was everything, even if no one thanked him, he believed history would eventually see what he saw. What he learned, though, was harsher. Being right doesn't rebuild a career. It doesn't pay rent. It doesn't make people understand or forgive. Being right, he says, is just being right. Nothing more. As his voice softens, there's no triumph in it. Only acceptance. At 80, dying, he's still explaining a decision he made nearly half a century earlier, still wondering if anyone ever will understand. He knows how he'll be remembered. Not as a man who stood on principle, but as the actor who left Bonanza. Difficult. Ungrateful. The one who walked away. Maybe that's all there will ever be. And yet, he allows himself one small hope. That someday, someone might watch the show with new eyes and finally understand why he had to leave. The tape ends. Silence. Pernell Roberts died in 2010 at 81 from pancreatic cancer. His funeral was small. The obituaries repeated the same line, the actor who left Bonanza. Years later, Marcus Webb released portions of the interviews, believing Roberts had been right all along. History, at last, caught up, but it didn't bring him peace, success, or forgiveness. It only confirmed what he'd always known. He paid the price. He died alone, and he was right.